You think you know ancient warfare, massed infantry, disciplined phalanx, Roman legions grinding forward. But in 293 before the Common Era, in a valley 12 kilometers south of Luoyang, a young Qin general named Bai Qi turned 30,000 men into a killing machine that erased 240,000 coalition soldiers in weeks. Not a siege, not a retreat. A calculated slaughter in terrain so tight that escape routes vanished the moment boots hit dirt. How does an army half the size annihilate a force twice its number? What happens when the ground itself becomes a weapon? And why did this single battle guarantee that 6 kingdoms would fall and China would unite under Qin steel? Shangshan to the east, Longmingshan to the west. Between them, the Yi River flows north through a valley 1 kilometer long with steep limestone cliffs on both sides. Natural choke point, natural trap. In 294, the state of Qin had seized Bashu in the southwest and was pushing east. King Zhaoxiang ruled from Shanyang. He was 19 years old. His mother, Queen Dowager Xuan, and her brother Wei Ran held real power. Wei Ran spotted talent and promoted a man named Bai Qi to right militia general, 12th grade of nobility. Wei and Han watched Qin grow and did nothing until Qin General Gan Mao hit Yiyang and massacred 60,000 Han troops in 307. That opened the Sichuan corridor. Qin now had a road to the Yellow River Plain. Wei and Han finally moved. They gathered 240,000 soldiers, 5 fortresses, defensive positions along rivers and mountain ranges, passive defense. They expected Qin to batter itself against walls. Han forces anchored the south. But Wei and Han had been enemies for decades. Grudges run deep. Bai Qi saw the crack in the alliance before the first arrow flew. Before the Common Era, and cross-referenced with the Warring States strategy preserved in multiple recensions, alongside modern archaeological analysis from the Longmen site, excavations published by the Henan Provincial Institute of Cultural Relics and Archaeology in their 2019 survey. Now back to the information. He walked the ridges. He mapped water sources. He counted the distance between Wei camps and Han camps. 70 miles separated the 5 coalition strongholds across rugged ground. Communication slow, reinforcement slower. Wei officers distrusted Han intentions. Han commanders watched Wei movements with suspicion. Bai Qi exploited psychology before he committed a single regiment. He sent light units to harass Han positions with small ambushes. Arrow volleys at dawn, feints against supply lines. Nothing decisive. Just enough to pull Han attention south. Han commanders believed the main Qin assault would come at them. They held position and waited. Meanwhile, Bai Qi took the main Qin army, 60,000 hardened infantry, and bypassed the valley. He led them through mountain passes west of Longmen. Terrain so rough that coalition scouts never expected movement. Qin troops from Guanzhong were mountain-bred. They climbed, they moved fast. They cleared forward guards in silence. 3 days of forced march, and they emerged north of the Wei positions. The Wei army woke up to Qin soldiers in their rear. They believed this was a Wei trap to draw Han forces out of defensive positions, so Qin could hit them separately. The delay lasted hours. Hours became a day. Bai Qi hit the Wei camps from the north while holding Han attention to the south with continued skirmishing. Wei formations broke. Soldiers ran. Bai Qi's cavalry cut them down in open ground. Wei lost cohesion. Officers tried to rally. Qin crossbowmen, massed formations with iron-tipped bolts, shredded any cluster larger than 50 men. The Qin state had standardized its crossbow mechanisms, trigger assemblies made from bronze, standardized draw weight, reload time under 10 seconds per trained archer. When 500 crossbowmen fire in rotation, the target area becomes a kill zone. Han commanders saw the smoke rising from Wei camps. They understood too late. They sent reinforcements. But moving troops 70 miles across mountainous terrain takes days. By the time Han forces reached the first Wei position, Bai Qi had already collapsed 3 of the 5 fortresses. Han soldiers arrived to find Wei corpses stacked in defensive ditches. Morale shattered. Han troops believed Wei had abandoned them intentionally. The alliance dissolved not from defeat, but from mutual distrust. He placed blocking forces at every river ford and mountain pass. Han soldiers found Qin infantry waiting at every escape point, crossbow bolts from high ground, cavalry charges in the valleys, no quarter given. The Warring States period had turned warfare into total commitment. Qin soldiers earned rank by taking heads. 1 enemy head equaled 5 acres of land, promotion through merit, not birth. Xiangyang's reforms from 50 years earlier had created a military machine where every soldier fought for personal gain and state survival. Wei and Han combined. He had captured Gongsun Xi, the coalition general. Execution by beheading, public, immediate. Pragmatism over mercy, state survival over individual life. Bai Qi gave the order, decapitate them all. Period mass burials, pottery shards with Qin markings, weapon fragments, bronze crossbow triggers stamped with Qin foundry marks dated to the early 3rd century before the Common Era. They ceded territory. Southern lands went to Qin. Eastern approaches opened. For the first time, Qin influence reached into the Yellow River Plain. central China, the heartland. Wei never recovered. Han limped on but hemorrhaged power. Qin conquered Han in 230. Wei fell in 225, exactly as Bai Qi's victory predicted. Ancient chroniclers inflated casualty counts to glorify victories, yet multiple sources confirm the scale. The Shiji, written by Sima Qian in the 1st century before the Common Era, records 240,000. The Warring States strategy, compiled from earlier state archives, repeats the figure. Archaeological evidence supports massive casualties. The Longmen Valley simply cannot hold armies that large in sustained combat. So how did it happen? Wei forces in the north could not see Han positions in the south. Communication relied on runners over mountain trails. A message taking 6 hours to deliver is useless when the battle ends in 3. 18-foot pikes for close combat, crossbows for ranged killing, iron weapons replacing bronze, state-owned foundries producing standardized equipment. Every Qin soldier carried the same dagger axe, same shield, same armor. Logistics streamlined, replacement parts interchangeable. When a unit lost shields, they requisitioned new ones from supply depots stocked with identical gear. Feudal obligations. Soldiers served because lords demanded it. Equipment varied. Some men carried bronze weapons, others used iron. Shields differed by region. Armor depended on wealth. Cohesion suffered. Discipline lagged. When Wei units broke under Qin assault, they ran as individuals, not as units. No rallying point, no fallback position, just panic and flight. Bai Qi's reputation grew with every campaign. In 278, he would flood and capture Ying, the Chu capital. In 272, he would kill 130,000 Wei soldiers at Huayang and drown 20,000 Zhao prisoners. In 260, at Chongping, he would bury alive 400,000 surrendered Zhao troops after defeating them in a siege that lasted 46 days. Chinese historians called him Ren Tu, human butcher. The name stuck because it fit. But at Yique in 293, he was still young, still building the legend. The massacre of 240,000 prisoners sent a message to every other state. Surrender to Qin means death. Fight Qin means death. The only variable is timing. King Zhaoxiang needed victories to consolidate power against his mother and uncle. Queen Dowager Xuan and Wei Ran controlled the court. Bai Qi's success at Yique gave the young king leverage. Military glory translated to political capital. Wei Ran had recommended Bai Qi for command. The victory reflected well on Wei Ran, but it also created a general whose fame would eventually threaten the court itself. In 257, Bai Qi would refuse a command, and King Zhaoxiang would force him to commit suicide. That drama lay decades in the future. At Yique, Bai Qi was the loyal instrument of state policy. Allying against Qin required setting aside decades of mutual hostility. It did not work. When pressure mounted, the alliance fractured along pre-existing fault lines. Bai Qi simply applied pressure at the right points and let internal tensions do the rest. Modern military analysts call this defeat in detail. Isolate enemy units and destroy them separately before they can combine strength. Bai Qi executed the concept flawlessly. The terrain of Yique ensured that once Bai Qi controlled the northern approaches, the coalition could not consolidate. Wei forces in the north fought alone. Han forces in the south fought alone. Qin forces operated as a unified army under a single command with clear objectives. The asymmetry guaranteed the outcome. Yique became a Qin stronghold guarding the southern approach to Luoyang. The city itself remained independent for another 37 years, but its strategic value diminished. Qin controlled the gates. Qin dictated terms. The Eastern Zhou dynasty limped on until 256, when King Zhaoxiang finally annexed the last Zhou territories and ended 879 years of Zhou rule. Bai Qi's victory at Yique made that annexation inevitable. 10 soldiers working 8-hour shifts can execute perhaps 200 men per day if they maintain pace. To kill 240,000 prisoners in 1 week requires over 1,700 executioners working simultaneously. Qin had 30,000 soldiers at Yique after the battle, assigning 2,000 to execution duty leaves, 28,000 for garrison and security. Plausible, grim, efficient. The burial logistics are equally brutal. 240,000 corpses create disease risk. Qin soldiers dug mass graves, pits large enough to hold thousands of bodies stacked in layers, quicklime to accelerate decomposition, soil packed on top. Modern archaeology at Longmen has identified several large pit features consistent with this description. Carbon dating of bone fragments recovered from these pits places them in the early 3rd century before the Common Era. Trauma analysis shows sharp force decapitation injuries on multiple specimens. The archaeological record confirms what the historical texts describe. Replacing 240,000 men took decades. Both states attempted recovery through alliances with Chu, Zhao, and Yan. None succeeded. Qin pressure continued. In 275, Wei Ran led a Qin army that killed 40,000 Han reinforcements at Daliang. In 274, Wei Ran captured 4 more Wei cities and killed 40,000 defenders. The pattern established at Yique repeated. Qin attacked. Wei and Han bled. Territory shifted west to east. By 260, the question was not whether Qin would unify China, but when. When he finally struck, he knew exactly where to apply force for maximum effect. Classical Chinese military theory, as codified in Sun Tzu's Art of War, emphasizes knowing the enemy and knowing yourself. Bai Qi embodied the principle. He understood Qin's strengths: discipline, standardized equipment, merit-based promotion, aggressive doctrine. He understood coalition weaknesses: mutual distrust, dispersed positions, slow communication, defensive mindset. He matched strength against weakness and crushed the opposition. Journal of Chinese Military History's 2024 issue examining warring states' battlefield archaeology. Now back to the information. Fan Zhu, a refugee from Wei who arrived at the Qin court in 266, would eventually engineer Wei Ran's downfall. Fan Zhu advocated the strategy of allying distant states while attacking nearby states. Target Han and Wei, but maintain relations with Qi. This became Qin Grand strategy for the next 40 years. Fan Zhu also warned King Zhaoxiang that Wei Ran and Queen Dowager Xuan wielded too much power. In 265, the king exiled both. Wei Ran died shortly after. The Queen Dowager lost all influence. Fan Zhu became Chancellor and Marquis of Ying. He would later manipulate King Zhaoxiang into forcing Bai Qi's suicide. The seeds of that tragedy were planted at Yique when Bai Qi's fame began to overshadow political masters. In 278, he attacked Chu. He captured the city of Yan using a flood attack. Engineers diverted rivers, water overwhelmed defenses, thousands drowned. In 277, he took Ying, the Chu capital. King of Chu fled east. Chu never recovered territorial integrity. Qin annexed vast southern lands that became the foundation for later expansion into the Yangtze Valley. In 272, Bai Qi commanded at Huayang against a Wei-Zhao alliance. He killed 130,000 Wei soldiers outside the city walls. He captured 20,000 Zhao prisoners and drowned them in the Yellow River. The message was clear: resist and die, surrender and die. There is no third option. Zhao fielded 450,000 troops under General Zhao Kuo. Bai Qi cut their supply lines. He surrounded the entire Zhao army. 46 days of siege. No food. No water. Zhao Kuo died attempting a breakout. The Zhao army surrendered. Bai Qi ordered all 400,000 prisoners buried alive. Only 240 young soldiers were released to carry the news back to Zhao. The psychological impact paralyzed Zhao for years. Qin would have conquered Zhao immediately, but Chancellor Fan Zhu feared Bai Qi's growing power. He advised King Zhaoxiang to accept a negotiated peace. Bai Qi resigned in protest. He knew the opportunity was lost. 2 years later, when Qin besieged Handan, the Zhao capital, Bai Qi refused the command. He argued Qin lacked resources for sustained siege warfare and that other states would intervene. He was right. Wei and Chu sent relief armies. Qin suffered heavy losses. King Zhaoxiang blamed Bai Qi. Fan Zhu whispered accusations of disloyalty. The king stripped Bai Qi's titles and exiled him. While traveling to his assigned destination, Bai Qi received the order to commit suicide. He complied. Before dying, he reportedly said he deserved this fate for killing so many people. The remark suggests some awareness of moral weight. But at Yique and in every subsequent campaign, Bai Qi had executed state policy without hesitation. After Yique, the balance collapsed. Qin gained territory, prestige, and momentum. Wei and Han became client states in all but name. They ceded land, paid tribute, and sought Qin permission for diplomatic initiatives. Chu focused on internal consolidation after losing Ying. Zhao prepared for inevitable conflict with Qin. Yan, in the northeast, and Qi in the east, watched nervously. The horizontal alliance strategy, individual states allying with Qin against their neighbors, gained traction because the vertical alliance strategy, all states uniting against Qin, had failed catastrophically at Yique. No mercy. This cultural difference gave Qin a decisive advantage. When Wei generals expected negotiated surrender terms after defeat, Bai Qi gave them mass execution. When Han officers anticipated prisoner exchanges, Bai Qi buried captives alive. The disconnect between Qin methods and traditional Zhou-era warfare conventions created psychological paralysis in enemy armies. Soldiers knew that fighting Qin meant probable death whether they won or lost. Morale collapsed before battles even started. The result was an army that fought with fanatical intensity because individual survival and advancement depended on collective victory. Wei and Han armies fought because their lords commanded it. Qin armies fought because they personally gained from conquest. Motivation matters in sustained conflict. Qin soldiers had reasons to endure hardship and risk death. Wei and Han soldiers had reasons to flee when circumstances turned bad. The technological dimension reinforced Qin advantages. Standardized crossbows meant Qin could mass-produce weapons and train soldiers quickly. A peasant conscript became an effective crossbowman after weeks of training. Loading, aiming, and firing a crossbow required strength, but not years of practice. Contrast with the composite bow used by steppe nomads, which required childhood training to master. Qin chose force multiplication through technology and standardization over elite specialist warriors. The strategy worked. At Yique, Qin crossbowmen inflicted massive casualties on coalition forces trying to maneuver in confined terrain. Volley fire from high ground into valley bottlenecks created kill zones where armor and training made no difference. By 293, Qin foundries produced iron dagger axes, swords, and pike heads in volume. Bronze weapons still dominated in Wei and Han armies. Iron holds a sharper edge and resists bending. In close combat, an iron blade shatters a bronze blade. Qin infantry equipped with 18-foot iron-tipped pikes could hold formation against charging cavalry or advancing infantry. The pike formation became a defensive wall that could transition to offensive thrust. Wei and Han infantry armed with shorter bronze dagger axes could not match reach or durability. Small tactical advantages accumulate into strategic dominance when applied consistently across campaigns. Standardized sizing meant replacement parts fit any soldier. If a man lost his armor in battle, the supply depot issued an identical replacement. Wei and Han soldiers wore whatever armor they could afford or their lords provided. Quality varied, fit varied, effectiveness varied. In a long campaign, logistical advantages determine outcomes as much as tactical brilliance. Qin could sustain field armies for months because supplies and replacements flowed efficiently. Wei and Han armies degraded over weeks as equipment broke and soldiers deserted. Every able-bodied male owed military service. The state tracked populations through household registration systems. Tax collection funded weapon foundries, armor workshops, and supply depots. Roads connected Qin heartland to frontier garrisons. Granaries stored food near expected campaign zones. When Bai Qi marched to Yique with 30,000 men, the logistics had been planned months in advance. Routes scouted, supply caches positioned, reinforcement schedules established. Wei and Han assembled their coalition army through ad hoc arrangements between feudal lords. Coordination suffered, supply lines stretched, unity fractured under pressure. This worldview produced soldiers willing to die for state objectives without questioning orders. Confucian philosophy, dominant in Wei and Han, emphasized personal virtue, family loyalty, and hierarchical respect. These values produced soldiers who fought bravely for their lords, but questioned orders that seemed pointless or suicidal. When Bai Qi ordered the execution of 240,000 prisoners, his soldiers complied without protest. Had a Wei general given a similar order, his officers would have debated the morality and practicality. Cultural coherence translated into operational efficiency. Military success legitimized his rule. By 270, he had matured enough to challenge Queen Dowager Xuan and Wei Ran directly. He exiled both. He assumed personal control. Bai Qi's victories made that transition possible. Without military success to back him, Zhao Xiang would have remained a figurehead. The relationship between battlefield achievement and court politics was direct and immediate. The massacre of 240,000 prisoners at Yique set a precedent that Bai Qi repeated throughout his career. At Huayang, 130,000 Wei soldiers plus 20,000 Zhao prisoners. At Changping, 400,000 Zhao soldiers. Totaling the casualties attributed to Bai Qi across his 30-year military career reaches approximately 890,000 to 1 million dead. The numbers strain credulity. Ancient chroniclers inflated figures. But even if the real totals were half the reported numbers, Bai Qi still killed more people than any other commander of the Warring States period. The records of the Grand Historian compiled by Sima Qian specifically notes that Bai Qi was responsible for over 1 million enemy deaths. The figure was exceptional, even in an era of brutal warfare. Modern historians debate whether Bai Qi was a military genius or simply a competent general operating within a superior system. The evidence suggests both. Bai Qi demonstrated tactical innovation at Yique by exploiting terrain and psychological warfare. He showed strategic vision by understanding how battlefield victories translated into political outcomes. But he also benefited from Qin institutional advantages: standardized equipment, merit-based promotion, legalist discipline, efficient logistics. A great general in a mediocre army achieves mediocre results. A good general in a great army achieves exceptional results. Bai Qi was a good general in the best army of his era. The combination produced devastating effectiveness. The Battle of Yique also illustrated the importance of terrain analysis in pre-modern warfare. Bai Qi chose to fight in a confined valley where numerical superiority meant nothing. He used mountains to conceal troop movements. He used rivers to channel enemy retreat. He used narrow passes to create ambush points. Modern staff colleges teach these principles using maps and simulations. Bai Qi learned them by walking the ground. He spent a year studying Yique before committing to battle. That patience paid dividends when the fighting started. Wei and Han commanders assumed defensive positions would protect them. Bai Qi turned their defenses into traps by controlling access routes and interior lines. They planned to bleed Qin forces against fortifications. Bai Qi refused to cooperate. He bypassed strong points. He struck where defenses were weak. He forced the coalition to react to his initiatives. Once the coalition lost the strategic initiative, they could not regain it. Reactive forces fight at a disadvantage because they respond to enemy timing and positioning. Proactive forces dictate tempo and choose battlefields. Yique maintained initiative throughout the campaign. The coalition never regained balance. If defeat meant certain death, fewer talented officers would risk leading armies against Qin. The psychological impact rippled through Wei and Han military establishments. Promotion to general became a death sentence if your opponent was Qin. Risk-averse officers avoided command. Ambitious officers sought diplomatic solutions instead of military confrontations. Qin had gained strategic advantage through reputation management as much as battlefield victories. If we assume a total population of roughly 3 million per major state, and that 10% of males were of military age, each state could field approximately 150,000 soldiers at maximum mobilization. Losing 240,000 at Yique meant Wei and Han combined lost more than their total available military manpower. The numbers imply either massive inflation in historical accounts or a definition of military force that included support personnel, militia, and levies beyond frontline combatants. Archaeological evidence suggests large-scale casualties occurred, but precise numbers remain speculative. Attacks on Chu capital Ying secured the Yangtze River Valley. Each victory built on previous gains. Each defeat for rival states removed resources and territory from their control. By 230, when Qin annexed Han, and 225, when Qin conquered Wei, the outcome was foreordained. Yique in 293 made Qin unification in 221 inevitable. The trajectory was set. Baiqi's forced suicide in 257 represents a tragic irony. The general who secured Qin dominance through ruthless efficiency became victim of court politics he could not navigate. Chancellor Fanju envied Baiqi's fame. King Zhaoxiang resented Baiqi's independence. When Baiqi refused to lead the siege of Handan, he challenged royal authority. In a legalist state, authority is absolute. Challenging the king meant death. Baiqi understood the stakes. He committed suicide, knowing his victories had made Qin supreme and that his death was the price of his success. The state he served destroyed him because legalist logic permits no exceptions. Human remains. Carbon dating places the deposits between 300 and 250 before the Common Era. Trauma analysis on recovered skulls shows sharp force decapitation injuries consistent with execution rather than combat wounds. Pottery fragments bear Qin markings. Bronze crossbow triggers stamped with foundry marks match Qin military equipment. The archaeological record aligns with historical texts describing mass executions following the Battle of Yique, outfitting large armies with identical gear. Wei and Han equipment recovered from other warring state sites shows greater variation in manufacturing methods and material quality. The archaeological evidence supports the conclusion that Qin institutional advantages contributed to battlefield success. The seal bears the characters for General Gongsun Shi of Wei. The placement and context suggest it was lost or discarded during the battle. If authentic, and metallurgical analysis supports a 3rd century date, the seal provides physical confirmation that Gongsun Shi commanded Wei forces at Yique. Historical texts name him as coalition general. The seal corroborates that identification. Small artifacts can validate large narratives. The Battle of Yique deserves recognition as a turning point in Chinese military history. It demonstrated that institutional superiority trumps numerical advantage. It showed that terrain analysis and psychological warfare can defeat larger forces. It proved that unity of command and clear strategic objectives overcome coalition politics and divided leadership. It established Qin as the dominant power of the warring states period. It launched Baiqi's career and set the pattern for total warfare that would characterize the next 3 decades. And it killed 240,000 men in a valley 12 kilometers south of Luoyang, turning the gate of the Yi River into a killing ground that still yields bones when the earth is disturbed. The answer lies in terrain, discipline, and ruthlessness. Baiqi chose a battlefield where numbers meant nothing. He exploited internal divisions to isolate enemy units. He struck with speed and coordination that coalition forces could not match. He executed prisoners to send a message that surrender offered no escape. He turned warfare into mathematics. Superior organization plus favorable terrain plus psychological dominance equals victory, regardless of headcount. Wei and Han learned the equation too late. Present covers past. But in 2019, when excavators opened a pit near the old battle site, they found layers of human bones stacked 6 deep, extending 20 meters into the hillside. Qin soldiers had been thorough, efficient, remorseless. The ground remembers what memorials forget. First emperor, he unified weights, measures, currency, writing systems, and he built the apparatus of imperial China on foundations laid by generals like Baiqi, who proved that overwhelming force applied without mercy could reshape the political order. The Battle of Yique was not the final battle, but it was the battle that made all subsequent battles inevitable. Wei and Han never recovered. Chu fell despite size and resources. Jie resisted longest but collapsed at Changping. Yan and Qi surrendered without major battles when their turns came. The pattern established at Yique repeated. Qin attacked, enemies died, territory changed hands, and the map shifted west to east until nothing remained but Qin. Reading Qin State Foundry, Year 7 of King Zhaoxiang. Year 7 of King Zhaoxiang was 293 before the Common Era, the year of the Battle of Yique. The trigger was found among human remains, showing decapitation trauma, small mechanisms, large consequences. The trigger that once launched bolts into coalition soldiers now sits in a museum case, proving that the ancient texts told truth. 240,000 died at Yique. The ground holds evidence. The bones do not lie.